Hello and welcome to the Gaggle Global Challenge, and if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle, and we are once again very fortunate to welcome back a good friend of the Gaggle, political analyst, podcaster, and general expert on the Middle East, Kevork Almassian. Kevork, welcome back. There's a great deal, obviously, to talk about, and one striking thing is that this massive marketing operation on behalf of this terrorist group that has seized power. They nearly come through the ballot box. They seized power in Syria, is being presented to the world as somehow the fruition of Western enlightenment and advance of democracy and progress. And we were getting these media stories, well, Syrians are looking for justice. There has to be some kind of reckoning with these terrible past. And then we have Western dignitaries, meeting and having earnest talks about women participating in the future of Syria. So, Kevork, I mean, where are you? Where are you? Where is Syria? What's going on? What's your take on recent events?
First of all, I'm very grateful that you guys invited me again to your show. Your audience is also growing and they're also craving for more information about what's happening in Syria, which is, if, as you already explained, if you turn on your TV, it's rainbows now flying over Syria and everything is beautifully transitioning toward democracy, right? So I think it's very important to tell the people who is Jolani. And before even telling them who is Jolani, the main argument was against the Assad regime that his father came after a military coup, so he doesn't have political legitimacy to rule Syria. This was an argument presented by the opposition of the Assad rule. But Jolani himself, he came to Syria again via a coup. Yeah, so he seized the power. He didn't deserve to be in the presidency to begin with, and he's using the Syrian state institutions like the Syrian presidency and the Syrian presidency palaces in order to receive guests. Nobody elected Jolani in this case, but he is the de facto leader, just like Egypt says. Egypt's position is correct on this when they call him the de facto leader and not the leader of Syria, because there still has to be elections in the next years, which he says he may do them for 4 years from now. So why 4 years from now? That's important because during these 4 years, there are certain strategic files that Jolani has to resolve before elections or before any elected government comes to power, one of which is the maritime borders. So, of course, Jolani is a construct of a Turkish intelligence and American intelligence, but he is mostly under the influence of Turkey. So Turkey now says we want to draw the maritime borders, which means they want to have their investments in the Syrian shores where a huge amount of gas has been discovered in front of the Mediterranean. So Turkish companies or Qatari companies want to have let's say, the monopoly over extracting this gas from the Mediterranean. Secondly, we have the Israel issue. So what Erdogan basically told Jolani, and this was revealed by a Turkish journalist, Recep Soyu, I think he's a pro-Erdogan journalist in the Middle East Eye. He says that Erdogan informed Jolani to tone down with Israel and stay passive, like don't say nothing and send positive signals. And this explains the statements from HTS officials, including the governor of Damascus, that HTS is not in a position to fight against Israel, and on the long run they want to normalize the relations with Israel. So I believe in this case, during these 3 to 4 years, he wants to also finish on this file, basically. I don't come and say that he necessarily will sign on a peace treaty with Israel, but he will definitely create a country which is incapable of asking, at least in the UN Security Council, for the right of Syria over the Golan and now in Quneitra. And today, the Israeli occupation forces are only 20 kilometers away from Al-Mazeh airport, military airport. So these two cases are important, and let's remember also Qatari gas. Probably during this time, he will strike deals with Qatar. And internally, this is very important. What Jolani is basically doing, this sectarian persecution and violence against especially the Alawites, this is intentional, and he knows it is happening, and he can at least gives stricter instructions. But we have seen demos, militant demos in Jable, in Tartus, and they're calling for the women to cover their head and men not to cut their hair like the Jews and the Christians. This is what they say. And yesterday in Damascus, they have invaded one of the Christian neighborhoods, asking people to stop drinking alcohol, closing the alcohol shops, etc., 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 and massacres. In Homs, they are killing entire families. If you're an Alawite, you're done. In Homs. Homs is the most brutal place at the current moment. So why are they doing this? In my opinion, because they want to create this security climate in the country that every component of the Syrian society starts thinking narrow. So if I'm an Alawite, I only now belong to the Alawism. If I'm a Christian, I think as a Christian. If I'm a Druze, I think as a Druze, and Kurds, etc., in order to divide the country vertically. And once you do that, you already destroy the national identity of the Syrians. I don't remember, and I think this is 100% factual what I'm saying, in the past 50 to 60 years under the Assad rule, there was not a single demonstration pro or against which was one color. Like you would never see a Christian demonstration or an Alawite demonstration. What is this? I've never seen anything like this in Syria, but everyone is now thinking narrow. So the Alawites and the Christians now say, we cannot coexist with these people. Then we have to ask for international protection. But this is the trap. The trap is to create the problem and then present a solution. And the solution, those who are presenting the solutions are the same ones who empowered HTS to begin with in order to conquer Damascus and create this situation for the minorities. And this is something that we have seen in the past, like French mandate, or the French comes and tells the Maronites in Lebanon that I'm your protector. And now it's going to happen with the Alawites, with the Christians, but also with the Druze. The Druze, in my opinion, when HTS attacks any of the Druze communities, you will see the Druze calling for the US and Israel to protect them, just like the case with the Kurds. So overall, the situation is so fragmented in the country, and I can tell you with great confidence, these so-called pundits and experts who are speaking about Syria, they're telling lies and manipulating the people into believing.
That's it. My question is about how this story is being portrayed to the outside world, because when HTS, their coup with outside support, kind of shattered a lot of framing of what's going on in the Middle East, because obviously the genocide is bad, but what's happening in Syria is good. And I see this kind of fragmentation. Last time we spoke, we talked about the influence of Qatari media and the agenda that they have. It was really quite remarkable, too, that the BBC, I guess now it's about 10 days ago, talking about what you just said there, is that, and I'm paraphrasing, I'm trying to collapse it into a few sentences here, but the Alawites are getting what they deserve.
Yes, I watched it.
That was put on BBC. Democracy Now!, obviously a misnomer in the United States these days, just repeated it, that, basically there's a settling of scores here. So my question to you is, my whole menu of media to understand what's going on has been not only shaken, it's been shattered. I'm very, very suspicious of what I read and what I research, because a few months ago, it was more or less settled. You were one of the top people that I would go to understand what's going on. But now what traditional media that I had relied upon seems to have gone AWOL or just gone rogue. Go ahead.
Actually, Peter, I watched this interview. She was the correspondent of BBC, and she was on Democracy Now! And what she did, basically, she advocated for genocide against the Alawites. And she painted the Alawites in two ways. Once she said that they were the popular base of Assad. Secondly, she said, like, they live in the strongholds of Assad, which is like, what is the stronghold of Assad? Like, this is the most absurd way of describing it. Secondly, she revoked their Syrian identity, because she said they're affiliated to Iran. And this is even more dangerous because during now on the ground, if you see all these activists affiliated to HTS and also the so-called liberal activists who flew from Washington, D.C. for liberated Syria, they were all speaking about Iran's occupation of Syria. Meanwhile, the Israeli occupation forces are 20 kilometers away. Their entire motivation is for this political issue in Syria is based on the hatred of Iran. But Iran is out of Syria now. And they didn't have military forces, combat forces on the ground to begin with. They were Lebanese and they were affiliated forces to Iran, but they didn't have Iranian forces on the ground in the past. And Assad in the past 2 to 3 years, when he started opening up to the Arabic countries, he sent back many of these Iranian forces back to Iran, and including in Western Aleppo, where the attack happened by HTS at the first days. So there is also a video reportage. I would like to mention this on Deutsche Welle, DW, which is a German public television funded by the German Foreign Ministry, and they published a video. Basically, they are portraying these massacres and against the Alawites in Latakia, in Homs. They're reporting about it, but they're always mentioning that the Alawites were always supporters of Assad. But this is so untrue. People need to know that in the 80s and in the 90s, there was a big wave of communism and socialism and different type of intellectuals in the coast. They despised Hafez al-Assad. There were many political prisoners from the Alawite community in the Assad government dungeons because they were running against the pan-Arabist nature of the country. And many Alawites were also didn't adhere to the political line of the Assad government, but they also knew the alternative is the one that we already described and warned against, that the Muslim Brotherhood types and HTS and Nusra, these groups cannot build. They can destroy a status quo. If you have a status quo and you want to destroy the status quo, you can use groups like HTS to destroy it. But to reform something else, you cannot use HTS. So now it seems that all the powers who supported HTS, they still want for the country to be further fragmented until they present their solution, so-called solution, which is nothing less than the best case scenario is federalism, and the worst case scenario is going to be Balkanization of Syria, complete separation of the regions in the country. But building a civil state under HTS, it goes even against the conviction of HTS. HTS doesn't believe in a civil state. They believe in an Islamic state. But the type of Islamic state they want in a country that is so diverse, and even among the Sunni communities, people do not want to live under an Islamic state. There are a big community in Aleppo and Damascus who are more or less, let's say, conservative, secular, but they're not adhering to the ideology of HTS. So imposing this type of rule, probably some people will be silent about it, but if you live in Sueda and you are 90% Druze, you don't have to live under an HTS rule. And you have the guns and you have the support of the Americans, and the Israelis could come and say, we are your savior, again, in this case. So I would argue the role of the media is very destructive in Syria. It has been for a long time. But now, at this particular moment, when we really need to speak about human rights, we have forgotten about it. Everybody is still recycling the same Sednaya prison where 4,400 people were there. Some of them were ISIS and al-Nusra and terrorists. Not everyone was innocent in Sednaya prison, but we always do this atrocity. They do this atrocity propaganda for the people to be distracted by this story, whereas the major story is gas, energy, borders, security. It's gone. Syria is gone, while we're still speaking about these issues about human rights violations which were committed 40 years ago.
Yeah. So you mean balkanization, but not ethnic cleansing. The goal isn't to drive the Alawites out or drive any other group out. It's balkanization. In other words, to go to something like the Lebanese model. Is it that you have just these separate communities? That's where they're heading?
I think you can have ethnic cleansing to create balkanization also.
Well, it's a different. No, it's a different. Ethnic cleansing means just driving them out altogether. The balkanization, they at least exist as a community. I mean, that's how I understand it. Because Lebanon, they still existed as communities, but but they weren't really part of the state.
Yes, I think practically an ethnic cleansing against the Christians has been already been committed in the past 14 years. We're speaking about 90% drop in the percentage of the Christians in Syria, even more. And now after this recent regime change, we don't know yet how many Christians fled to Lebanon and how many Armenians fled again to Armenia, but the numbers are big. And people could have their businesses and homes, let's say in Aleppo, I'm talking about the Christians, maybe they stay if they don't have a choice, they're poor, but if you have a choice, you will leave. And now, again, these NGOs coming in Lebanon, and especially the Armenian, there is an Armenian NGO, and taking the Armenians to Canada. Now, in the case of the Alawites, it's practically not possible to commit an ethnic cleansing against them. They are the majority in Latakia, Tartus, Jableh, over 90%. And in my opinion, if the situation becomes really serious, then the Alawites will hold guns again and fight back. And in this case, an international power will come and present itself as the peacekeeping force or try to separate them from each other. And this will lead eventually into the Balkanization of Syria. And I think this is the goal in Syria. Balkanizing Syria has been the goal for a long time. And the people didn't support, like there was no support for Assad. Like it's not like people were craving to sacrifice themselves for Assad, but the people knew that he's the glue which will put this country together, and we knew it because when we say the alternative, there are alternatives, and the people who were carrying the arms and doing the fighting, they are the ones who already have shown us what they are capable of doing in Iraq and what they are capable of doing in Libya. So it doesn't take much of a genius to predict that this is going to be the outcome. But the war of narratives is very important, and it's always there is this backlash. Like if I'm today Kevork, if I'm just bluffing and saying some BS, right? And it doesn't make any sense. I'm not making anything logical. Why would you attack me if I'm already let's say an idiot and I'm not making any sense on social media platforms? But when I see this consistent attack on this narrative, that it is warning them that this is going to happen. And when it's happening now, the attack still continues on me, including calls for revoking my Syrian citizenship. Why would you revoke my Syrian citizenship if I'm just trying to explain to you what could happen next? And people, unfortunately, have a memory of fish. I want to remind the people, before World War I, the Arabs were promised by the Brits that they will give them their Arabic country, right? One Arabic nation, and
a united nation, a United States of Arabs.
Arabs, yes, but you have to rise against the Ottoman Empire, and the Arabs bought that narrative and they fought against the Ottoman Empire, and then they got nothing basically. And this is the same thing. The Brits, the Americans, the Israelis are promising the people of the region to rise against the dictators, to free themselves, and then they would give them this beautiful democracy, cooked and baked with all the rainbow flags, and you have only to eat it. But the people are swallowing this. And I don't know if we have to blame the people, if we have to blame the regimes, if we have to blame the press, or a combination. But it's so sad to see this cycle of history repeating itself. So maybe history doesn't repeat itself. The people do not learn. I don't know what's happening really in this case. I'm so bothered.
But considering how these warped narratives that are being presented to us, how long how long can the narrative be, well, it's not great. How could it be great? But it's always better. It will always be better than it was under Assad. It seems to me that's the direction that they're going into, because the reference point is what was, but at least we are freer, okay? And the prisons are empty, okay? I mean, how long can that go? Because I agree with you completely. I mean, you have to start building a state to protect its citizens. I mean, and the longer that takes, if it takes too long, the outcome is exactly what you're going to say. It's just going to be balkanized. You're going to have the Americans and the Turks and the Israelis with their little orbits and all of that. I tend to think because of the inability, that glue that you talked about, that is forever lost. And it is just to manage
Yes.
a empty space. They don't really want anything meaningful to replace what was called Syria. Syria is gone.
Yes. Actually, I had a Facebook account where I had a massive following, and I deleted my Facebook account because I totally agree with you that Syria is gone, at least for the next 30, 40 years. We're not going to see again somebody leading a nation state in Syria. So Facebook for me was local. I'm talking to Syrians, I write in Arabic, so I felt like it doesn't matter now. It's not the time now to speak about a nation state. It's time for these HTS people to rule, to destroy, and so that the people hit bottom rock to the bottom and then see where they have reached. And only then they could rise again. But now it's not time for construction, it's a time for destruction. And I'm not a destructive force, so I withdraw from this conversation. But if you go back to the issue of the narratives, Peter, so the press, the mainstream press, the legacy press, so they presented us a narrative about Syria before the fall of Assad, right? And they were multifaceted and very well-constructed narrative. But when this narrative has proven to be untrue after the fall of Assad, which we warned that this is going to happen, there is now a new narrative in formation that we already forgot about the past narrative that they presented to us. And they always have updated narratives. They're updating or presenting new narratives to the people that they're so distracted to see that in the past few narratives that they presented, those were already wrong. And they didn't build on that narrative that they started to begin with. So they always bet on the time as well, that the people will forget what they told them in the past. And now there is a new thing, and we speak about the new thing, completely ignoring the past things that we told you. And this works like a clock with almost many people, like the majority of the people, including the Syrians, especially in an environment where if you speak Arabic, and if you watch the Arabic media outlets, you will be shocked by the low level of journalism in the Arabic world. And the vast majority of these media outlets are funded or affiliated with Qatar. Qatar has spent billions and billions of dollars since 1996, since the inception of Al Jazeera in the Arabic world, to corrupt the brains of the people. They have monopolized what is the truth. They have monopolized academia. They have monopolized journalism. They have monopolized now digital journalism. Their outlets are spawning every day, and they're funding people like myself. Like, they don't fund me, but if they find someone like me doing a podcast and his narrative fits the Qatari, let's say, strategic perception of the region, they fund this person and they pay hilariously for their journalists. Like an article in Al Jazeera, I remember 10 years ago, was a $400 per article, 800 words. And these numbers is like, if you're sitting in Syria and you write 3-4 articles per month, you're already doing a hell of a money, right?
If you look at their website closely, there are people doing that a couple times a week. I noticed.
Yes. So I would like to mention, like, if you go as a guest on Al Jazeera, and they invited me on Al Jazeera to Istanbul for a 40-minute show, and they want to pay $4,000 to me, $4,000 for appearing 40 minutes on a show in Istanbul. So they're buying the intellectuals, and rest assured, the most corrupted people are always the so-called intellectuals, because they're so ready to do this hasbara, justify things, this word salad. They try to create a narrative from nothing. And this has happened in Syria in the past 14 years. You have a generation.
What they did was, and George knows that I've complimented Al Jazeera on its coverage of the genocide, but that is what they want to do is they want to take that goodwill and expand it. It's very elastic. And the last time I watched Al Jazeera is when HTS came to power. I just deleted it. I don't watch it anymore. Okay, I'm sorry, George, go ahead.
But that is the reason why Al Jazeera's reporting on Palestine is very good, because the vast majority of the Arab world are with Palestine. This is something that is in their conscience. And you cannot be an Arab and not be with Palestine. Everybody knows this. But this is the place where Al Jazeera gains its credibility and its popularity, and then directs the trust of the people and their anger, which it should be directed at the US and the empire itself, and it directs directs this anger against Iran, against Syria, against Hezbollah. So in Al Jazeera, Hamas militants are martyrs, but Hezbollah militants are killed. So how do you explain it's the same bullet Israel is shooting on both sides, but one is killed and the other is martyred? They're engineering the public opinion in the region in a way and shaping them against the supporters of the Palestinians, so that when the time comes, Iran is destroyed, Syria is destroyed, Yemen is destroyed, Lebanon is destroyed, and who is giving tangible support to the Palestinians? No one. So the Palestinians come and say, we cannot continue this armed struggle. It's over for us. So this is the psyop of Qatar that many people fall for it.
But Kevork, you had an interesting short video the other day, which I thought was quite astonishing. You seem to be arguing that there is going to be an HTS-like attack on Egypt, on the Sisi government in Egypt, and the idea is to weaken the government in Cairo with a view to essentially opening up the Sinai to the Palestinians of Gaza. Is that? You want to just say a little bit, more about that?
Actually, I just want to say, I'm not a fan of Abdel Fattah al-Sisi's policies vis-a-vis Palestine. It was absurd the way that he treated the Palestinians to begin with. However, with the United States and Israel, it's not enough to be their allies. You have to subjugate. So even though Egypt is an ally of the US and they have a peace treaty with Israel, it's not enough for them. If you give them an inch, they will come a meter. If you give them a meter, they will come a kilometer. It's always like that. And when it comes to Egypt, since the October 7, and according to a leaked document by the Israeli intelligence, their plan was to push away the 2 million Palestinians to the Sinai. And they have promised to pay around $8 billion to Egypt to host and house the Palestinians in the Sinai. They promised 10 cities, and then talks been held here in the EU countries, including Germany and Belgium and many other European countries, that we have to find a formula, a quota, that how many Palestinians every European country can absorb. So they were trying to convince Abdel Fattah al-Sisi to host them and then send them to Europe, as many as they can. So this was a formula of ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians, and Sisi rejected it. And he said no, because from the Egyptian perspective, if the Palestinians come to the Sinai and some of them hold up arms or try to go back to Gaza and shoot one bullet, then Israel would say, now there is a security threat coming from the Sinai, and I want to create a buffer zone in the Sinai. And they have done this in 1967, right? They literally occupied the Sinai. So if you see the Grand Israel Project, what is the Greater Israel Project? It starts in the Nile and ends in the Euphrates. And if I want to see what the Israelis are talking about, and these ideologues and zealots in Israel about the Greater Israel Project, I would anticipate that there would be similar destabilization in Egypt in order to revive these ISIS cells in the Sinai, like in the past. And there are a group of Egyptians among HTS. They have posted videos from Syria vowing the Sisi that they're coming now to Egypt to start another type of regime change operation in Egypt. And I would like to add one more thing. His name is David Hurst or something. This is the editor-in-chief of Middle East Eye. He posted a video, and this video was so hilarious that I started to laugh at the end, because it was so obvious what he is doing. And he works for Middle East Eye, which is affiliated to Qatar. And basically, they're trying to push this narrative in every Qatari funded and affiliated media outlets that the people in Tunisia and Egypt should learn from the experience of the Syrians that in Egypt and Tunisia, they were not revolutionary enough. And to be revolutionary enough means they have to copy the experience of HTS. And what does that mean? Means that they need to copy the jihadi scene in Syria, in Egypt, and in Tunisia, and bring all these multinational terrorists from all around. This is happening in English language on Middle East Eye. So tell me, this is not directed and instructed by the Qatari editors in order to create this public perception, and especially in the context that Sisi did handled horribly the case of Gaza Strip during the genocide. So there is lots of anger and frustration at the Sisi regime in Egypt, so they could capitalize on this anger and madness and anger on Sisi to create another type of this Rabia Square thing that the Muslim Brotherhood tried to do in the past. Are they going to be able to do that? I really doubt that in Egypt they would be successful. They would need, like, we're talking about the biggest Arab military in the region, and I think they could try, but they would not succeed in Egypt for the time being, especially with the direct support of the Emirates and the Saudis. They are also terrified. And I would give you one information, which is it is. Of course, it's secret information, but probably everybody knows in Syria, the Saudis and the Emiratis have now many intelligence assets in Syria. And they're disguised as journalists, as humanitarian organizations, etc., because they're terrified by the HTS rule. Because if the HTS project moves to Jordan,
yeah, it succeeds. Yeah.
Succeeds, yeah. If they move to Jordan, this is going to be like on the hip of Saudi Arabia. So
I said this the last time we talked. I pointed that out. Yeah,
but sorry, just to follow up, is the goal here? Is this an American-led goal to get the Palestinians into the Sinai? I mean, in other words, to facilitate Israel essentially cleansing Gaza. Is this an American-led project?
I would argue, yes. I don't think that we can separate between the Americans and the Israelis now in the region. I am not one of the believers that Israel controls the entire United States. I think that there is an U.S. empire, and Israel is part of this empire. They
have different goals, but they overlap.
Exactly.
Okay. I don't like this wag the dog thing. You said something earlier that I think is really important. The sense of being Syrian. And you talked about how diverse Syria is with all of its different communities and the glue that was necessary to keep it all together. Can that be sustained without a Syria, being Syrian, identification as being Syrian? Because it ends up being a sensibility if you don't have the community. Can that be extinguished?
That's a very good question, George. I really don't know. When we go back like 60, 70 years under the French mandate, for example, people were also like, even these 3 stars on the revolution flag, they represented the Alawis, the Druze, and the Sunnis. You know, like they had this sectarian connotation. So the national identity was not really a thing until the Pan-Arabists came to the region and brought these different communities and tried to engineer lots of, even with the Jacobian first, some of the communities to become more or less operate under the Pan-Arabist umbrella. But when we remove this umbrella now, and we present lots of, let's say, security threats against these communities, then everybody starts identifying themselves with their sub-identities. I've never seen in my life, I never talked to a friend in Syria, somebody is telling me, like, we cannot live with the Sunnis any longer, or we cannot live with the Alawites any longer, or these Christians have to leave. I've never received as many messages, as many comments, people telling me, like, we have to revoke your citizenship because you're an ethnic Armenian, so you have to go back to Armenia, you know. So all these things are happening, and it is encouraged by these HTS activists and journalists. So I always argue that this is not something that happening accidentally, you know, like it is planned, and it is, the people know what action could bring what reactions, and they studied human behavior, and they know when you push the people enough into the corner and pose enough threat against them, they will act in certain ways, including violently. So they are now, what they're doing is, especially in Homs and in Latakia, they want for the Alawites to carry arms. And once they carry arms and they fight, this is how they start dividing the country. This is when this civil war starts in the country, and this is when the international powers come and try to responsibility to protect, etc., etc., etc. So I'm not saying that the Alawites should or should not carry arms, but they know after enough threats and after enough killings, they will carry arms. And I've seen a video from Jable, one of the Alawi sheikhs. He's calling on France to come as a protector, and this has blown my mind, because France has spent tens of millions over the people of HTS to bring them to power, and France is responsible for the situation in Syria. I'm talking about the deep states, right, in this country. The governments come and go. The politics is the same in Syria, regardless. And this is something important, George. I want to mention. The difference between Syria and Egypt, in Syria, we didn't have a deep state. The deep state was Assad. Assad, the son, Assad, the father. But in Egypt, we have a deep state. And even when the Muslim Brotherhood came to power, the military was still in charge of many things in the country. So therefore, even if they try to remove Sisi, whoever comes and goes, there is a strong, entrenched deep state in Egypt, and they're managing things from behind the curtain, just like in the US. I think this is the best formula for the future. For the region, there needs to be a deep state in any country, and the presidents and the prime ministers come and go, but they are foundations of the country and big headlines that cannot be crossed. Otherwise, building an authoritarian state after the way that Assad built, after the experience of HTS, it's going to be another trap for the people. It's going to be a cycle of repeating mistakes over and over again. So I'm not a fan of the Assad regime, and I'm not a fan of creating another regime like the Assad regime in the future. People need to establish a different type of governance. It's definitely not this liberal democracy. It will not work in Syria, about feminism and all this stuff. I think the experience on the ground proves that only the minority of the people in Syria and in the region, they adhere to these values of the West is trying to impose on the region.
What about external actors? I mean, you talked about France, and I'm reading these stories about the Kurds are asking the French to come in and help them. So what's France going to do? What's Turkey going to do? What are the Americans going to do? How do you see these external actors?
It's the ultimate, be careful what you wish for scenario.
George, like you pushed the nerve so much that I have to say this. Like the French probably are coming to surrender to Syria. I don't know. They're going to do something. This is look, France doesn't have the military capability to send all aircraft carriers and warships and try to protect the coast. They and operating when you remember when the French needed to send forces to West Africa, they didn't have enough carriers to send forces. I think the situation in Syria with the Alawites is very sad. Probably Russia would intervene. I don't know. I don't see any appetite, and I don't even see any discussion in Russia or in the Russian scene, the public discussion about the Alawites in Syria. So France is definitely not going to be able to protect the Alawites, probably in international protection.
Would they even want to? Would it even be a serious consideration?
Yes. Yes, it's already been said. I'm talking about a protest happened in Jable, and it was represented by the representative of the Alawites in this city.
No, but I mean, would the French have an appetite to do it? That's what I mean.
I don't know, but they have an appetite always to intervene in Lebanon and present themselves as the savior of the Maronites there. So if they are going to recreate maps between Lebanon and Syria again, I'm not sure about that. But who are the powers? I mean, Iran is not going to be. Definitely. Saudi Arabia and the UAE are not. France, UK, America. So those are the players. And the Alawites will not accept American support for sure. I'm 100% sure about that. But why French? This was also like mind-boggling for me. Why did they say France?
Okay, we're rapidly running out of time. Is there a limit to Israel's ambitions and appetite?
Actually, I think Israel is going to create a big security zone in the south and will try to open a corridor to Asweda and to Kurdistan, to the eastern shore of the Euphrates. So this explains why the Americans kept their forces in Al Tanf border crossing, because the plan is to open a road corridor between the Golan Heights all the way from Al Tanf border crossing to eastern shore of the Euphrates, passing through Al Qaim in Deir ez-Zor. So I think that the Israelis already achieved their goals in Syria. Regime change was on the top of the list. They have cut the supply chains to Hezbollah. Hezbollah has become a local player, and they were forced to accept Aoun as president of Lebanon, which is pro-Saudi Arabia and pro-US. And now Nawaf Salam came as a prime minister in Lebanon against the will of Hezbollah and Amal. Again, they didn't discuss with them many of the aspects of the government. So they have been localized now, achieved major goals in the region, plus occupied the highest hill overseas Lebanon and Syria, and their artillery can shoot on Damascus now, basically from these hills. And also importantly, they have occupied all the water resources in the south. So now they can control the water of the Syrians as well. Will the Syrians resist? Maybe in isolated cases, they would fight against the Israeli forces, but who can stop the Israeli Merkavas now if you don't have trenches, if you don't have bunkers, if you don't have missiles, if you don't have anti-tank missiles? Somebody has to supply these weapons, right? And plus, there has to be political cover, and it doesn't exist because HTS ordered the Syrians in Daraa and in Qunaytira to hand over all their light weapons to the HTS forces. So now the people who had individual guns and some AK-47s, everybody handed over their guns. So it's clear path for Israel to move in. But we were still talking about Iranian occupation. Like people still talk about Iranian occupation of Syria. Israel is 20 kilometers away from Damascus.
Right. What about the Americans? Now, the Americans, although they had this presence claim, we're fighting ISIS, we're fighting ISIS, we're fighting ISIS. What do you think the Trump administration is going to do?
They will impose a formula between Turkey and Kurds. I think that this is the only thing that separates between Turkey and the United States at the current moment in Syria. I don't think the Americans will going to push the Kurds under the bus. I don't think that they will allow HTS to control these large swaths of territories. There has to be a formula, a federal system where the Kurds can still have some access over these oil fields in the east, and also the water, of course, from the Euphrates, plus the wheat, because we have big food basket in the east of Syria. So they have to find a way that HTS can still have some access over the oil and these wheat fields, plus the Kurds having their autonomous region there. So, but this needs to be solved with Turkey, because Turkey will not accept the Kurds having borders with Turkey. So probably the solution from the eyes, or in the eyes of Erdogan and Trump, is to continue this security belt, completely block the northern Syria from southern Turkey, and then allow the remnants of the Kurdish militias to have an autonomous state under the flag of the so-called Free Syrian Army, or HTS. So officially they would be part of the Syrian state, but unofficially they are just operating like the Kurdistan in Iraq, having their exclusive rights and exclusive, let's say, administrative and political autonomy. But this is going to be a pre-phase before the Balkanization of Syria. This is going to be the best case scenario, remember, because the worst case scenario is if all these ethnicities and religions start fighting against each other and everybody goes to their cantons and start dividing the country on ethnic and religious lines. So best case scenario now at the current moment under these dire conditions is federalism, and the worst case scenario is civil war and then dividing the country and balkanizing it.
And the Russians, just the Russian bases, do you have any sense of what will happen there?
They are decreasing their forces in the airport. They're sending back lots of equipment. Maybe they would have some, let's say, I don't know, like represented something iconic there, but I don't think they will have a big presence in the Mediterranean. I'm learning from my friends and colleagues in Latakia and Tartus that every day new shipments are leaving from the Mediterranean back to the Crimea.
Okay, you twice you've mentioned this federalism, but there would have to be a lot of consensus all around to have a federalized state. Under the current conditions, I cannot even see that as even remotely possible. I mean, trying to even get a grip on the status quo must be hard enough. Being able to, I mean, having elections in 4 years, well, yeah, right. Get back to me when you want to talk about elections again. What they want to do, HTS wants to create an electorate that is going to vote once and then never again. Okay, that's what they want. So this whole thing, I agree with you. I'm trying to be open-minded here, but federalism would assume that there is something called Syria.
Yeah. And federalism, if it is between the countries in the region, like Syria and Iraq, it's a positive development for the region because this region is already been divided 100 years ago by Sykes and Picot. So bringing these countries together via federalism, and instead of the Pan-Arabists always argued in this geographical unity, and they're running after unity before even creating economic integration between the countries, that formula failed. But federalism between these Arabic countries could be a preface, like bringing the countries together and for economic growth for the region. But that's not allowed by the empire. So they have to divide even the divided. So I totally agree with you when I say the best case scenario is federalism. But do I believe it's going to happen? No, I don't believe it's going to happen. Every indication in Syria shows that Jolani is already, he needs 4 years to change 3 years to change the constitution, but he can change the curriculum in 3 days. How does that even make sense? And why is he changing the curriculum before the formation of a government? Because he wants to Islamize the country. He is changing I'm not like an absolute believer in the theory of evolution, for example, but I want to know about the theory of evolution. Excuse me. I want to learn in the books this, and I want to learn about what religions say. So having the option, the scientific option and the religious option is a good and healthy thing in any society. But he's removing every scientific aspect in the Syrian curriculum. He's removing the historical figures from the books. Like Zenobia, Queen Zenobia is removed from the books. Why is she removed from the books? And this tells us why ISIS destroyed Palmyra to begin with. He is the extension of ISIS, but in a soft power way. ISIS destroyed Palmyra, and HTS is destroying again Palmyra, but from the history books, from the minds of the people. So this Jolani, which is now endorsed and accepted by the quote-unquote civilized world, George. I mean, my level for tolerance has completely dropped to the minimum level that I'm in no way or shape able now to have a civilized conversation with them because it's so blatant what is happening in the region, and it is against us. And when I say us, indigenous people of the region, they are working against us. And the people who are celebrating the freedom of Syria, they're celebrating their demise. But in Arabic, there is a saying that today is the time for getting drunk and tomorrow is the time for thinking. So they're still drunk thinking that this is some sort of a positive development. You cannot replace a political authoritarianism with a religious authoritarianism and celebrate it. It doesn't make sense. So because you replace authoritarianism with authoritarianism, and even worse, because now the rest of the people will be considered second-class citizens under a religious state. Something that goes against democracy that they were preaching and promising the Syrian people. I don't know if how does this even make sense.
Well, Kevork, it's a very bleak, grim outlook.
But a very valuable opinion.
Exactly, very, very valuable. And once again, thank you so much for giving us your time and, another fascinating conversation. And we look forward to speaking to you again very soon. Thank you, Kevork. And remember, if you like The Gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe.